Major funding for these broadcasts is made possible by grants from Capital One Bank and Chase Commercial Term Lending, the Witkoff Group, New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, Greenberg Traurig, Perfect Building Maintenance, Genova Burns. Additional funding is provided by grants from AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Aerial Property Advisors, AVR Realty Company, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Citizens Bank, Colliers International NYC, CPEX Real Estate Services, Cushman & Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Fisher Brothers, First Nationwide Title Agency, Flushing Bank, Foley & Lardner, Friedman, Handler Real Estate Organization, HAP Investment Developers, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Chairman USRealty.com, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Madison Realty Capital, Massey-Knackle Realty Services, Matone Group, Mercantile Commerce Bank, N.A., Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, Newbanks, MHP Real Estate Services, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rosewood Realty Group, SJP Properties, Sterling National Bank, Sterling Risk, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Continuum Company, the CUNY TV Foundation, the Moynihan Group, and these friends.
I want to be a Broadway producer. I want to be in the Great White Way. I want to see it. I want to win a Tony. I want to win an award once. So I'm going to rub my crystal apple. Maybe it'll tell me I'll be lucky to be in the Broadway business. But I'm not a Broadway producer. But I brought together, or should I say, my buddy Paul Libin brought together Broadway producers to talk about I want to be a Broadway producer, and also to talk about their new show. So we have Kristin Caskey, who is Fox Theatricals, her partner in crime, Mike Isaacson at Fox Theatricals, and their third partner in crime for the new Broadway show, Barbara Whitman, and last but not least, Paul Libin from the Jujamcyn Theaters in the Circle and the Square. And the new show is called?
It's called Fun Home.
So, you work for McDonnell Douglas, okay? You started at Pippin, okay? And you started young in this business. How hard is it to become a successful Broadway producer? Who wants to try?
It's hard. It's hard. It is very hard, actually. So we feel fortunate. I mean, I think that's true. I think there are certain hallmarks. What I love about it is, I call it's the last bastion of the great generalist. You have to know a little about everything, and enough to have very smart, pointed conversations with the director, an actor, your theater owner, your the people your marketing department, your press department. So it really forces you to be on your game, and it's kind of beautifully relentless, actually.
Absolutely.
How many years have you been a Broadway producer?
I started, my first job on Broadway was in 1956.
But as a producer, how long?
1958.
So you've been producing for 47 years.
Right.
Right? How has it changed being in the business of being a Broadway producer today and different? I mean, the world has changed because of the internet, because of Twitter and the social media. That's changed. The other thing that has changed is, the success and the availability of utilizing computerization for getting tickets and other aspects. But how have you seen it really change?
Well, it has changed dynamically certainly from a artistic perspective in the utilization of technology that's made plays move quicker. The dramatic events that you witness as an audience happen more seamlessly than the past. In the old days, scenery, a curtain would come in, the scenery get changed behind, and then you'd come back and see a new setting. Now, when it's magically designed, nothing stops. Everything keeps going. The drama keeps being progressed before you, so you're focused totally on the dramatic event that you're witnessing as an audience member, and as an artist, that's the essence of that change that takes place. And that's happened, I remember the first show I worked on Broadway was a Ethel Merman musical. There were like 3 tables in the auditorium when they were doing the setup of the show and bringing the scenery in. The director had a table, the lighting designer had a table, and the scenic designer had a table, and they all worked on landlines connected. There was no wireless. There was no computers. And they had to change the cues. They had to erase things on paper and write the new cues.
Okay, so we'll go from the Stone Age to the current age.
Right.
So how do we see the difference? I mean, you tried your skill in acting, okay? Then originally, as I joked about the Pippin, you worked over in there. How do you make the evolution from acting to become a producer?
Well, I was a performer for a number of years, and then I stayed home with my kids for a number of years, and then I went to work in my father's business, which was in the finance. And then I wanted to combine my performing background and my finance background, so I got a master's in it. So for me, it actually feels like being a producer uses all the different things I've done. What Mike was saying, you have to have the more
skill sets,
including a skill set of being a mom, because a lot of what you do as a producer is you need to know when you need to go to the theater and give everyone a hug, and you need to know when you need to say, sorry, no, you can't have that extra set piece. And as a parent, you're constantly saying yes and no, and knowing what people need. So I feel like it's not only my finance background, it's also, and my performing background, it's my my life skills.
I never realized that there were all these graduate programs or continuing education programs to be a Broadway producer. You really produce the shows. You're on day to night. You live the business of the production. But what about these people who become angels today? Where do you raise the money, and how do you get people to invest?
Every show is different. I think what made Fun Home distinct is we had the opportunity of a developmental production down at the Public Theater. And the 3 of us supported that production. And as they say, new musicals take about 5 to 7 years from the first page to when you open it on Broadway. So we had been involved for a couple of years. And we decided to use that production to really see if Fun Home would be viable for the Broadway stage. And what was lovely is the immediate response from the audience and those, as you would call them, angels, which we're incredibly grateful to have, and would also call angels. Many people came to see the show, and the momentum from the critical response, the sales, their ability to extend the show 3 or 4 times before they were forced to close it for production that was coming in, just sort of had this rapid effect of inviting the show up to Broadway and knowing that we had the support, and we had the support from a number of investors who wanted to come on board because they believed in the show. Because at the end of the day, as much as we can talk about obviously putting together a smart financial package, and we can talk about the benefits of the show over the very long extended life it will have, ultimately what speaks to investors is the work, is the show, is their experience of the show, and often that's the connective tissue that brings them on board.
So in addition to having the money, the show and everything, another important element that we discussed prior to the show in the green room was you had to find the right venue.
Yeah, and
that you could have taken a big venue. I mean, let's say where Aladdin is, or the Palace, where you got 3,000 seats, but you took a special venue. Why do you go to this guy over here? I mean, would you trust him?
They didn't go to me. They went to the theater.
Okay, you're part of the theater.
There was a specific reason we went to Circle in the Square, and it came from dialogue that we had with our director. who looked at the experience of the show down at the public. And we all knew that it was an intimate musical about a family. And that part of what made it special was people's ability to feel as if they were connecting with that family. And we didn't want to transfer the show uptown and lose that experience. Because at the end of the day, what ultimately will have the show work is that the experience people are having is one that when they leave that theater, they go out and they want to tell all of their friends about the experience they had. And what Circle in the Square provided for our creative team was the ability to retain that intimacy and truly create a unique experience that complemented the unique experience of the show. And Paul, to his credit, was so receptive to the idea. And what's been lovely in the week and a half thus far that we've been in performances is that the experience we were hoping people would have is paying off in spades. And that's been a real lovely experience.
I would like to add a note to that, if I may. When you see something on a proscenium stage, it's presentational. You certainly get involved, and the depth of your involvement as a theater person who's attending a performance has a certain kind of dimension. But I think when you take this family and the tale that this great play presents in the environment, you, because of your proximity to everything that's dramatically happening, you are involved. It is so powerful in terms of your response to the dramatic event that takes place in your presence, that it involves you in a way that when something is presentational on a proscenium stage doesn't have the same impact, although there have been plays that do accomplish that. I think this production of Fun Home is further enhanced by that unique relationship between this family and the drama of this family and the music of this family, that you are just there. You are part of this family. You are eavesdropping on this family in a unique way.
Sam Gold talks about, our director, he says, whenever he talks about the experience in the round, he remarks that his hope is that you feel as if you're in their living room.
There was this show, and I happened to even meet the lead producer a number of years ago, of a show called Rebecca. In a way, has a negative connotation for the theater because of the way money was raised or the production. How do people make the right decision that they're in the right show if they want to invest? And how do they find out about opportunities to become an angel or something in the business?
Well, it's interesting because for all of those numbers and those ideas, it's an intensely personal business. Mm-hmm. And you form these partnerships. I mean, we formed a partnership with Barbara, and we had worked in different ways and not this kind of role with each other on other shows. But you have to have an intense conversation up front about, do you see the same show? Do you see it the same economically? Do you see it the same artistically? And there's a huge covenant of trust. It ends up in legal documents ultimately, but it is a core thing. And when you gather your co-producers, that's really your first conversation. Do we all see the same show?
I mean, there was that pretty good article that I read in Barron's, basically saying something that I never thought, that if you have a show and it's the right type of show, and you discussed this prior to the show in the green room, you can continually have royalties for the rest of your life on a show if it's the right show. Now, people thought that Rocky might have been the right show, but you're never going to see royalties from Rocky. It's over. Now, you know, Honeymoon in Vegas came from the Paper Mill Theater in Millburn. It did okay, and it closed, and it's not going to have any opportunities. So can somebody really, what's the success and failure rate of producing a show today?
I mean, I think, you know, we would
They
say...
can't answer failure because they've never...
So, you know, 25% maybe of shows.
I think that's the normal kind of figure that people use. 1 out of 4 usually returns its investment and continues to make money into the future.
I was going to say, if you're looking to invest, I would look at the person's track record, because if people, we're picking the things we think are going to succeed.
Pick
and
the
some
right
people,
horsey.
Yeah, and some people are really good at doing that, and some people are really good. You're calling them an aggregator. We don't use that term. We call them producing partners. I mean, some people are producing partners on multiple shows, and they really are very successful at picking things that do well. And then there are some people who just don't have that ability. So if I was that would be my recommendation if someone doesn't know anyone and wants to figure out how to become an investor.
Now, how do you get your name? I'm not saying lights, but how do you get your name in the playbills? You know, as a producer or lead producer, and for different shows.
Well, it's different if you're a producing partner. It's often based on the amount of money that you're either investing or raising. For those of us that are when you use the legal term, a general partner or a lead producer, very often you've been involved with that show for years prior to it coming on Broadway. And when we talk about the idea of perseverance and the years that it takes to get to that position, part of it is experience and having some sense of what's required to evolve a show to the point where it ends up on Broadway. Because by the time it gets to Broadway, there's been a long journey for it to get there. That's why I always say people should
So the 9
celebrate.
months of a child, it's much longer.
It's much longer. But it's a very good comparison because we always talk about when you are committing to a show in many respects, it is like raising a child because it is with you for years to come. We did Thoroughly Modern Millie 15 years ago, and it's still very much a part of our lives.
And for the lead producers for our partnership, it's very much a marriage. You know, we are together all day, every day, whether we're online or we're actually together. But I see them more than anyone else.
We were talking about that. You know, when Mr. Libin went in, you know, they used to have rocks and they would knock names over there, you know, to produce the show. Now we have internet. I know you even have an iPhone, I believe, you know, or do you have the flip-flop?
I have an iPhone that was checked before I came on set by a very, very responsible crew and
Okay,
staff.
so today, how important is social media for the production of a Broadway show?
Word of mouth is key to a show's success, and now often happens through the internet. But the beauty of theater is that with every technological advance, whether it be video games or TV or film, there's nothing that compares to the experience of live theater, of being in that audience, that community. And that's sort of a gift to our industry in that you can't replicate it.
I mean, I believe I have 3 people who were born or grew up in Chicago here,
Yes.
right? And then I have someone who grew up in New York. But Paul Libin made this great comment on one of the shows a couple years ago, saying people come to New York to visit, and they come to visit New York, and they save their money, and part of the experience is they want to see live performance on Broadway. This is part of the New York experience, and you can have it in St. Louis at the Fox Theater, no question. You can go to Denver, you go to Chicago, but there's nothing like Broadway. It's the Great White Way, and people will scrimp and save so they can come to Broadway. And that's, you know, that was one of your great comments, and it's true. But I think people out of the market, the internet really has helped you get the show off. Now, what effect, like when you did Thoroughly Modern Millie and all the other shows, that's when records and CDs were being sold. Today, we don't have, I mean, people don't go in the store and say, I want a CD. Today, you know, it's
Well, they
streaming.
do get it. They just get it online.
Right,
I mean,
it's online.
Just hit their phone. Right.
Right.
And for a musical, making sure you have a recording is not only, you know, it's important for the legacy of the show, but in terms of marketing and getting the word out. In fact, we made a recording off Broadway, and under those rules, you do a limited pressing, which was, you know, fit the economics that we're at. And one of the things that gave us the economic courage that Kristin was sort of talking about is the label called us and said, something's going on with this CD we've never seen before, because usually when an off-Broadway show closes, the CD sale stops. And yours keep growing. In fact, we're going to run out of the limited pressing. So that told us there's genuine word of mouth. There's people saying, whether online or to each other, you have to hear this music. It's really wonderful.
So when you're producing a show, are you thinking about the next show?
Always.
Yeah, I mean, we all have, I mean, I currently have a tour that's out that I'm working on. You're in development for a couple of other things. So we always have multiple projects.
Are most of the, when it's success, as someone said to me, I think maybe it was Paul or Bob Wanko or Nick, the real money, the profitability is if it's a musical. Musicals have a higher propensity to earn larger sums of money than dramas. Why?
It's the great American art form. I mean, we can go on for hours of this. It is literally this country's gift to the world. People love musicals, and they, it's the only form of the arts that's actually still existing in the schools in the most way. You do the school musicals. It is American in its fiber. It's New York in its heart, and so that matters to people. They love them.
What about the productions of, as I would call them, but Paul would disagree with me, of the revivals, of bringing something back? But it's revival to me because I've been in a generation when the show came up.
It only becomes a revival for someone who's seen it before.
I mean, The King and I is coming back.
Yeah, but that's because you saw it. There's millions of people who never saw it.
But here's my question on that. You don't say Hamlet's a revival.
No.
If something's great, it's worth doing and re-exploring, and new directors and designers finding something.
But let's look at it. This year, we are having new productions of a number of shows. American in Paris.
That's a new musical.
That's a new musical.
We have Gigi, we have On the Town, On the 20th Century, King and I, Sideshow. Those are the revivals for this year.
Right. And those are all projected to do well. Hopefully.
Well, Sideshow's no longer around.
Sideshow hasn't. But
it's off on the side.
But you know what? What happens to, people look at this way. Everybody was waiting, and it was in your theater, I believe. Everybody thought Woody Allen show would have been great. You can't always make a winner, right?
Well, that is also the mystery and the conceit of the American theater.
As I always
the
say,
things that you think are going to absolutely knock the world over just don't.
Whenever you spoke a little bit about graduate programs, and oftentimes we'll speak on panels about producing, and someone will ask, how do you know if it's a hit? And the way I always answer that is, if I knew what would be a hit, I'd be off on my private island having a cocktail and sending you all postcards. That is the mystery of the business.
You can always define a hit 10 years after it opens.
Yes.
Yeah. It's always easier to raise the money than to create a great show. And one thing that we learned very early on is if you get the show right, which is the hardest thing, the money follows.
We talk about raising the money. Sometimes you raise the money, and this is, if we have to compare this to both the restaurant business and to the real estate business, you don't have enough money. You thought that this is what I need, and then you have to go back. How difficult is it to go back to your partners and say, I need an additional capital call?
It's a great question, and I will relate it to the choice to go from being a producing partner to a general partner. Part of the understanding that occurs when you go into a partnership and you become a general partner is that when that moment happens, if you see a real viable course for your show, you have to figure that out, whether it's from outside resources, whether it's from your own company. But we have had experiences where that question has come up, and by answering it, we in fact lengthened the life of the show in a pretty astonishing way. So that truly is at the core of what does it mean to be a lead producer, is you have to be able to see the financial scope of the show and understand if that...
Right. And you have to be willing, in case there are cost overruns or other contingencies, to be there.
Yes.
But I must say, one of the tough calls as a producer is deciding that it's not viable to keep the show running. That is the hardest decision I've ever had to make on a show.
How do you make that decision?
You look at all the numbers.
It's like saying the child. I've had.
I know you do everything you can. You try as hard as you can, and there just comes a day. I mean, every show is going to close at some point. Right. Hopefully, they don't close before it's their time. But I've had shows close when I felt, it wasn't right. I didn't want to close it, but there was no other choice but to close it. That's a hard choice.
Mike and Barbara answered a very important question earlier on about what a producer is. And Mike's definition is you have to be a generalist. You have to know a lot of things about a lot of different circumstances. And you characterize it as, in many ways, it's like parenting. Because as a producer, you can say no to creative people. If you don't say no the right way, you're in deep trouble. And as a parent, you sometimes have to say no to a child, or you have to say it has to stop. You can't go any further. You can't do that anymore. You must never do that anymore. And that's, as a producer, Barbara really nailed it. Sometimes you have to say, look, we did everything we can and it's over. Because running yourself into bankruptcy doesn't solve any problem. It just compounds all the problems. And you have to be responsible about that kind of decision when it's not going to work. You have to say no. And of course, when you're a general partner and a lead producer in an undertaking or a consortium like the three of them are, you make those decisions, and there's no formula for it.
One quick question before, because my time is nearly up. How the three of you meet?
I was a producing partner on one of the shows that they were a general partner on, Legally Blonde. Everyone told me, you have to meet Mike and Kristin. You have to meet Mike and Kristin. You will love Mike and Kristin. And they were right.
And as I was saying before the show, when you're a producer or a true lead producer and a general partner in this, it's in your DNA and you'll continue. It's like the adrenaline built into your system that you can't leave it. And that's why your show will be a great success. And I would like to thank Kristin, Mike, Barbara, and of course the Dean, Paul Libin. Thanks for being here. And hopefully we'll have them back. And needless to say, go to their website or tweet them and find out about the show, and see you next week.
Thank you.